Today on Law Next, earlier this month, the Legal Services Corporation, the largest funder of civil legal aid in the United States, held its annual Innovations in Technology conference in Phoenix. This year's conference was particularly special for a couple of reasons. For one, it was the conference's 25th anniversary, as well as the 25th anniversary of the Technology Initiative Grants program that was the genesis in some ways of the conference. For another, this year's conference followed the official retirement in November of the man who got the conference started in the first place and who oversaw it all these years, Glenn Rawdon. As program counsel at the LSC since 1999, it was Glenn Rawdon's job to assist legal services programs with their technology efforts, manage technology initiative grants, and make this conference happen every year. Glenn is my guest today to share some of the history of the TIG grants and the TIG conference, as it was long called, and hopefully offer some of his perspective on how technology has changed the legal services landscape over the years. This is Bob Ambrogi, and you're listening to Law Next, the podcast that features the innovators and entrepreneurs who are driving what's next in law. Automate your firm today with Practice Panther, the leading all-in-one practice management software trusted by thousands of attorneys just like you. With powerful features like customized workflows, streamlined client communications, automated billing, and easy time tracking, you'll be able to get back doing what you do best, practicing law. Discover how Practice Panther can transform your firm today. Visit practicepanther.com to get your free trial. Love writing and responding to discovery requests? Well, neither do we, which is why litigators everywhere use BriefPoint to draft discovery responses and requests for documents in minutes. BriefPoint is the most reliable discovery drafting solution on the market, and it works right out of the box. Get your first document drafted within minutes of your first sign-in by going to briefpoint.ai and clicking Get Started. No credit card required. BriefPoint. Draft what matters, automate the rest. Now let's get to today's conversation. Glenn, welcome to the show.
Hi, Bob. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. Now that I'm retired, I need things to do.
Well, I'm happy to keep you occupied here. Obviously, we just saw each other what was it, just last week or a couple of weeks ago anyway, in Phoenix.
It was just last week?
Just last week, where we both went probably expecting some nice warm weather and instead got hit with some sub-zero temperatures at night. And it was, anyway, that's another whole problem. But there's a whole lot of stuff I'm interested to hear about from you, but we were actually just kind of chatting about this a little bit before we started recording. But what was your kind of backstory before you even went to LSC? How did you get involved in the whole tech world in the first place? What were you doing before that?
Well, when I graduated from law school, instead of going to work for a firm or something like that, I decided to start my own office. And as soon as I did, I realized that there was one thing about law school. It didn't teach you how to run a law practice. So I started getting involved with, studying, going to some courses. I purchased a book from the ABA called How to Create a System for a Law Office.
Okay.
And then I went
You didn't buy Jay Foonberg's book, did you?
I went to see Jay Foonberg in person. He taught me a very valuable lesson, which is when you get too busy, don't hire more lawyers, hire more support staff. And so I started working on technology, and I started out with a mag tape typewriter that I've got. Then I went with an Olivetti typewriter with an 8-inch floppy disk and a whole 24-character screen on it. Then I got into Radio Shack computers, and I kind of, in conjunction with the book on creating forms and everything for your law office, I hired a programmer to write a document assembly program. This is the early 1980s, because it just was silly to me the way you were always having to go in and retype everything like that. So I did it because it helped me in my practice, being more efficient and being able to, I started offering fixed fee services. This is back in the 80s, so that you were able to get a bankruptcy for a fixed cost or an uncontested divorce or will or incorporation, all because I had automated all the forms and it made it very easy to do that. And so that's how I got my start, was because I needed it to make me more efficient so that I was able to make more money in private practice.
It's really funny, that story, because I've often had the conversation with people who say that lawyers are Luddites, that in fact lawyers aren't Luddites. Some lawyers are Luddites, but many lawyers are in fact very innovative and entrepreneurial when it comes to technology, and that in the earlier days of technology, it was more often the solo and small firm lawyers who were adopting those kinds of innovations because they didn't have all the resources of a big firm. They needed technology. They needed those tools. I've been around this space for a long time, and I remember, in the earlier days, even of the internet, a lot of the lawyers who were doing the most innovative stuff on the internet or who were kind of adopting the early internet in a major way in the early days were all the solo and small firm lawyers, and even often in the more rural areas too.
Right. Well, and I remember, you talk about being a Luddite. I remember how proud I was of myself when I got my first hard drive. It was 20 megabytes, not gigabytes, megabytes. Cost me $3,000, and I was able to partition half of it in CPM and half of it in Tristos. That's the Tandy Radio Shack operating system. That's how far back I go in technology on this. And I was so proud of myself to be able to partition that one hard drive like that to use for our system and get rid of the 8-inch floppies.
Yeah, use those for coffee coasters or something, right?
Exactly. I still
Uh,
have some of them, I think, somewhere stored away. I just
I'm
couldn't
sure.
throw them away.
I know I still have some of the 3.5-inch discs, but the other thing you mentioned, we both mentioned Jay Foonberg. It's another funny thing because probably a lot of people listening to this show would say, "Who the heck is Jay Foonberg?" But Jay is, I believe, he's still alive. But Jay was the man when it came to law practice management back in the days. And Jay's book, "How to Start and Build a Law Practice," was kind of the Bible, I think, for a lot of lawyers starting out on their own. I know the first time I started my own solo practice, the first thing I did was go out and get a copy of Jay's book. I didn't meet him then, but I did meet him later. I got to know him pretty well in later years. Really good guy.
Well, the Oklahoma Bar Association wasn't really doing any law office management things, but the Texas bar was. So I would go down to Texas, and that's where I met Jay. He did a presentation for the Texas Bar Association. And he just really inspired me to get more efficient in the way we practice. And I think that's one of the things that, I've tried to carry through into legal services is, I always tell people I did it because it helped my bottom line, which was money. But in legal aid, we need to do it to help our bottom line, which is client serve.
Right, right. So you had your solo practice. You at some point began to work for the legal services program in Eastern Oklahoma, right? So
Correct.
how did that come about that you made that transition?
Well, I practiced law and I opened a second office that was doing bankruptcies in Oklahoma City. And, like I said, it was very successful. I was doing well. I was doing insurance subrogation work, uh, but it just wasn't satisfying. Just making money wasn't why I had become a lawyer. So I decided to use some of that money and take a little time off to reflect on things. So in 1988, I started 6 years sabbatical from the practice of law and did what everybody did. I went skiing. I traveled around Alaska, settled down in Florida, and played a lot of golf. And one day, my friend Gary Dart, who was manager of the Legal Services of Eastern Oklahoma, called me and said, "Hey, Glenn, are you through being a lawyer?" And I said, "Well, I don't know, Gary, why?" And he said, "I'm opening a new office in Bartlesville. I'd like you to come back and manage it for us." And so I thought, well, okay, that sounds good. So that was in 1994. And so I came back and started automating the offices here in Eastern Oklahoma. And John Kemp, a lot of people that know legal aid will know, had a case management system at the time, Kemp's Caseworks. And so I met John and started learning Access and using his system. And John invited me then to do some trainings for him. So I started doing some national trainings while I was still working at Legal Aid of Eastern Oklahoma on Kemp's. And that's when I got noticed by LSC, and they created a new position to help programs with technology and invited me to apply in 99. And that's how I wound up in 1999. Like I tell people, I started working for LSC in the last century.
Yeah, that's true. Did you know when you went to work for them that I know the TIG grants formally started in 2000, so that was probably within months of your arriving there. Was that something that was already in the works when you arrived there, or what was the status of that?
They had had a technology conference in, I think it was in 1998 at the Airley Conference Center. And they had discussed the fact that, within LADA and other partners that were at the conference, the need to get some special funding to help our programs with technology. But we didn't have it yet when I showed up. So I worked with our government relations people writing up the budget requests for this additional money that would be dedicated as a special line item in our funding that would be just for technology to help our programs and help with resources for self-represented clients. And so that was successful. So we got the funding, and the president at the time, John McKay, came to me and he said, "Hey, Glenn, we got the money. Now set up a grant program." And so I had never applied for a grant, much less written a grant program. So I went over to the Department of Commerce and saw a fellow there named Steve Downs, who was running their top program, Technology Opportunity Project, something like that, where they were making grants. And I had noticed them because they had made a grant to one of our programs in Florida to do some video conferencing and such. So he shared all his materials with me, and I do what any good lawyer does. I take somebody else's pleadings and I change them and plagiarize them. So that's how I started the KIC conference, was kind of following the model that the Commerce Department was using for their technology program. And like you said, it started in 2000.
Both the conference and the grant, right? Started the same. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
What we
Was the
decided
conference
to-
like a real conference at that point, or was it more of a kind of a user group or something? Or
Well, what we did was there was a legal aid funders group at the time, and we were talking about what we could do, and we decided that it would be good for all of the new TIG grantees that year to get together and start learning about project management, evaluation, that type of stuff. But around our state planning efforts, LSC was also going through what we called our state planning initiative again, where we were trying to cut down the number of programs, getting them to merge the service area so they could be more efficient. It didn't make much sense for one program to have two officers, to have a board of directors and all that. So in conjunction with that, we wanted to put together some teams as a pre-conference to talk about state planning. So we had representatives from 7 to 10 states. I can't remember. We had somebody from the Bar Association. We had somebody from the courts. We had somebody from legal aid. They all came together for a day of planning on what they could do to move access to justice forward and to have a more coordinated system in their states. Then the second day was for our new grantees to come together. And we had a grand total of 32 people in that room. And it was a plenary session all day long for one day. But that was the start. It started in New Orleans in October of 2000.
with that first, I'm just curious, that first year of the grant program, you had these grantees come together, but did the legal services programs kind of get it? I mean, were they eager to apply for technology grants, or were they wondering, what the heck would I do with this money? Because what do I need technology for? I mean, what was the thinking at that point around all of this?
They had all heard about websites, so almost everybody wanted a new website. Fortunately, there were some others like Orange County that wanted to do some kiosk system. That was the ICANN system. I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah.
And then also DNA, our Native American program that serves New Mexico, Arizona, and parts of Utah. They wanted to do some kiosks as well. So there was a few innovative things, but most of it was about wanting to do websites. We just didn't want to do websites from scratch for every different program. So one of our philosophies from TIG from the very beginning is doing things that can be replicated. So we worked with Pro Bono Net and another group out of Colorado called Kaivo to develop 2 different templates for the websites. So everybody that wanted a website, we put them in the conditions in there. We'll give you a website, but you have to use one of these 2 templates, and you can't use more than $10,000 of the grant for the development and implementation. Everything else has to go on content because that's what's most important. And so that was something that, that first round was really heavy with those new statewide websites. And the other condition we put on it, Bob, was that if you wanted a website, you had to work with all the programs in your state on this. This couldn't be something for individual programs. It was supposed to be one website that would serve all the programs in the state, even though the grant might just go to be one of the programs.
All of the LSC funded programs in the state would have to
LSC-funded
be, yeah,
programs, right.
yeah.
Say in Virginia, where you had 6 programs, all 6 would work together on the statewide website.
What was the TIG budget that first year? Do you remember what that was?
Yeah, the first year we had 7.5 million. We had a little bit less because of a general, like, I forget how much was, how they do these rescissions where everybody gets cut so much, but it was still over $7 million. So it was a nice, healthy sum to start out with. It's more than what we get next.
It's more now. Was it at 5 million now or 5 million, right?
5.5, I think.
5.5. How how did that happen that it went down over the years?
It's Congress, Bob. It doesn't have to
yeah.
be rational.
Yeah, all right.
Well,
right.
and also, though, they did give us the extra funding for the Pro Bono Innovation Fund that was modeled on the way we did TIG. So it's actually more than that in total, but part of it is done now just for Pro Bono. In the beginning of TIG, we did a lot of projects that focused on technology for Pro Bono innovations, but that has passed more over to the PBIF funding stream now from TIG. So it's not like we really have less money. It's just kind of part of it now is dedicated to Pro Bono.
Yeah. Again, I'm kind of curious about just the thinking about technology at 25 years ago within the legal services community, within the legal services corporation, because, obviously it was 10 or 11 years ago now, the LSC put out that kind of seminal report on the importance of using technology to close the justice gap. And I know that they've been working for this past year on kind of an updated version of that. Was it perceived, was 25 years ago, were people talking about technology as kind of critical to serving this population, or was it just a nice to have or a convenience or something like that?
Well, there was a core group of us that thought that this is going to be essential. I mean, we really need to do this. And with my background in document assembly, one of my initiatives when I came there was to try to get our programs to use document assembly. Because, just cutting and pasting in Word every time is not the most efficient way to generate all those. So one of the grants that I was able to get through was to create a national document assembly server. And to decide on what platform to do for that, we commissioned Mark Lauritsen to do a study in New York City. And we brought a bunch of thought leaders from legal aid and a bunch of vendors together and looked at all of the different solutions. And then the TIG program funded Ohio to run a national hotbox server that was, donated by LexisNexis for us to use for this purpose. And so they also donated the authoring software, and we paid for trainings for them. So, the programs could no longer say, oh, it's too expensive, because I gave them free software, I gave them a free server, and I gave them free training. All they had to do was put the people in to do this. And so that's what eventually transitioned over to Pro Bono Metrorun, and that's, became the Law Help Interactive. So that was one of the things. The other thing that was really big at the time, I don't know if you're familiar with Carpels in Chicago. That's a hotline program, but they've been doing there for years. It's not LSC funded.
I don't think I am.
But
No.
people were murmuring that a better way to do intake, instead of just having everybody come in for appointments, was to be able to do phone intake. See, when I started at Legal Aid in Oklahoma, we would have people call to make an appointment on Wednesdays for if they wanted a divorce. And as soon as those slots got filled up, they were told, you got to call back next week and hope that you get through. And what that meant was people who lived near an office were most likely to get legal help. And so one of the things we wanted to push with KIG was to get more and more people doing hotline. So at the beginning, we did a lot of phone systems for people to implement hotlines and being able to use, the voice over IP so that they could route the calls wherever they had the operators, everything like that. So that's when people really began to start seeing the influence, was when we were able to get automated forms and start doing hotlines.
And the automated, was it, was hot docs already existed? So you adopted
Right.
hot docs to, yeah, okay.
Yeah, I'd been using Hotbox when in eastern Oklahoma. I started doing those because, like I said, I had a guy write a program for automated document. By the time I came back from my sabbatical and started working with being paid, Hotbox already existed. And so that's why we were to use it. And Ron Stout, who had worked with LexisNexis, still had connections there, was able to get us that donation of the server, which really helped us, where we didn't have to pay for a server's license every.
As we mark both the 25th anniversary of the Legal Services Corporation's TIG conference and the retirement of the man who oversaw the conference all those years, we'll hear more from Glenn Rawdon about how the conference evolved when we return. But first, please take an opportunity to learn about the sponsors who so generously support this podcast. Are you drowning in administrative work? Practice Panther is the all-in-one legal practice management solution trusted by tens of thousands of lawyers to streamline their processes. With automated time tracking, secure client portals, and customizable workflows, firms save hours every week on non-billable tasks. Practice Panther's intuitive platform seamlessly handles everything from client intake to payment processing, so you can focus on what matters most, serving your clients. Start your free trial today by visiting practicepanther.com. In an ever-evolving legal market, there's one thing that stands the test of time: great client service. That's where Lex Reception comes in. Their agents are available 24/7, 365 days a year to answer calls, qualified leads, onboard new clients, and schedule appointments. With bilingual agents and software that can seamlessly integrate with your current workflow, you'll never miss a call or future case. With over 12 years of experience, Lex Reception gives lawyers the time and freedom to focus on core legal work and helps them grow their firms, all while building their reputation for great client service. Check them out today at lexreception.com. Welcome back to Law Next. Before the break, Glenn Rawdon was sharing his memories of the early days of the TIG conference, which started in 2000 with 32 people meeting in New Orleans. Let's get back to that conversation. So regarding the conference, so you had that initial kind of get together in New Orleans, 32 people, did you say, or 36?
32 people.
32 people. What happened from there? Did it start immediately to become kind of an annual get together, or how did it develop after that first time?
Well, again, Ron Stout at Chicago Kent by then had gotten involved, and I gotten to know him, and he was doing a lot of work. Even before Margaret, he was working with the design school there at Chicago Kent, come up with better ideas to do that. I've still got the book that he
Before Margaret
about
Hagan.
that. Yeah. And so this is one of those things. He invited us to use Chicago Kent. So the next 2 years, we went to Chicago Kent. But we had programs who said, do I have to have a grant to come? And we got to thinking about it and thought, well, no, maybe you want to make, we'll invite more of the GLAY programs to come. So we opened it up. It wasn't just the grantees, and it just started growing. And then we outgrew Chicago Kent, so we moved to Austin. And we did Austin on 6th Street for quite a few years, because who doesn't like Austin on 6th Street? But we outgrew that hotel. They actually knocked down one of the walls to expand the thing so we could do it a few more years there. And so it's just been growing and growing. And like this year, we had 700 people with a waiting list. And we've opened it up. It was called the TIG conference in those early years. But then sometime about 2014, 15, something like that, we started calling it the Innovations and Technology Conference, because it had outgrown just legal aid. We started getting people from the courts. We started getting people from overseas. We started getting people from academia. And so I'm just really amazed at how it's grown. I used to take every presenter out to dinner the night before the conference. That's how small the group was. Now this year we had 150 presenters.
Yeah, and beyond your credit card, I guess.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Well, when it got to the point where I was going to have to book it like a banquet hall just for the presenters, I decided, okay, it's time to give that up. And so
yeah,
then we
yeah.
started having the opening reception instead. So.
Yeah, no, it's great. I, I I I can't remember when I first went, but it was still called the TIG conference, and I think I may have told you this, but I had a very good friend who was involved, who worked in a legal services office, who was involved in technology in that office, who kept telling me, "You've got to go to this conference. You've got to go to this conference," and for many years it always conflicted with something else. Maybe it was Legal Week in New York or something, but there was always some reason I couldn't get to it. And I finally made the effort to get to it one year, and I was really glad I did. I mean, it's a really fantastic conference, and I think part of what I wrote about this year. And I don't know how people took it or not, but what I appreciate about the conference is there is this sort of level of scrappiness because a lot of these programs don't have huge budgets for innovating technology or developing technology, but they have this very strong desire and this strong sort of innovative entrepreneurial skill set that has them do a lot with what resources they have, I think. And one of the things I think the conference brings out every year is the fact that a lot of these programs are really doing some cool stuff with not the same kinds of budgets that private sector legal tech companies are having. So I don't know. Do you see that? Do you kind of feel that there's like a degree of kind of scrappiness that comes through in this conference?
It's the scrappiness and the can-do attitude. Jim Sandman, when he was the president, he would come to the T conference, and he always said it was his favorite conference because everybody there was so upbeat and positive. They weren't complaining about funding cuts and all that type of stuff. It was like what they were going to do to move all this forward. And so it's a very positive attitude. And one of the things that people have to realize about the TIG conference, we may have had 150 presenters, but only one of them received a speaking fee. Everybody else is donating their time. And so this is a community effort, not just an LSC effort. It wouldn't exist if people weren't willing to come up with those good ideas. What we do, I say we spill because I feel like I'm still part of it. What we do is we ask the community for session ideas. And about the end of May, we'll put out the request for those. And then Jane and I and David and now Ange and the others we'll get together, review those, pick out the ones that we think have the most promise, and put together all the different sessions, and they work with the presenters on that. But it all comes from the community. It's not LSC's content, it's the community's content, and it's the enthusiasm that I think radiates through the conference.
Yeah. This is the 25th year, as we've said. Has the conference, other than size, other than numbers of people participating in it, has it evolved or changed over the years in your perspective?
Well, we've gotten a lot more interest from, like I said, from the courts, from academia, and even from overseas. A couple of years ago, we had people, they came from South Korea to come to the conference. We've had people from Australia, South Africa, England. We get lots of Canadian participation. So I think that it's changed in that it's not so much focused anymore on legal aids technology. It's more on the broader access to justice, not just
Mhm.
in the US, but also worldwide on how we can improve that. I was lucky enough a few years ago to be able to go to Paris and do a presentation for OECD. And there were people from all over the world that were sitting there and talking about technology. And it was amazing to me how similar the issues are, even with, the different laws and everything like that, that the plain language, having the forms, having the legal information available to the people that don't have lawyers. All of those issues were being faced by countries all around the world. And I think that the ITC has become kind of the biggest conference on using technology to improve access to justice in the world. And so that's a very different flavor than when we started, when it was focused on improving legal aid delivery services.
Yeah, I agree with that assessment of it. And I assume that's part of the reason the name was changed from TIG conference to ITC. Is that right?
That's right. We didn't
Yeah,
want people to think it was only for legal aid
yeah,
or
uh,
only for people who had a TIG grant.
yeah. As you think back over 25 years of this conference, was there any particular particularly memorable events or things that happened over the years that jump out of your memory?
Well, I can tell you my most memorable, and that was in 2010. We were in Austin and they had an ice storm. And so I had gone down a day early than everybody else because, there's lots of stuff to work with the hotel and everything like that. And I wake up that morning and I look at my phone and it's maxed out on messages. And I thought, this can't be good. And that's when I found out that they'd had a little bit of ice in Austin, but then they'd had bad weather in Chicago, Atlanta. I mean, it was like nationwide. So I had people who couldn't come in. So I was the only LSC staff member that was able to make it to the conference. So I'm running the whole conference by myself, trying to juggle, okay, well, these presenters aren't here yet, but these presenters are, but they're scheduled on Thursday, but I'll move them to Wednesday. I mean, Emma, the lady at the hotel, worked with us to get some little badges printed up that said, I survived the ice storm of 2010. Uh, it was just, and of course, it's Texas, it's Austin. So any little bit of inclement weather and it shuts everything down. Well, Ed Marks, I don't know if you knew Ed, but he was one of
Yeah.
our directors and he was from Ohio. He wrote on the board, the storm of the decade in Austin is a cold day in Toledo. So, but that was one of the most memorable ones.
Everybody's talking about the snow this week in New Orleans, but I remember when the TIG conference was in New Orleans a few years ago, like 2018, maybe 2019, somewhere around there. It was really cold in New Orleans that week. It was like below freezing temperatures, as I recall, in New Orleans. So not quite ice storms, but
Yeah, we
I guess
always
you
try to
guys.
pick a venue in the South, but you can just never be sure. That's why we quit doing Chicago's when we wanted to go from October to January. That was one of the differences too that we hadn't talked about. We used to have it in October, but what we realized is that was so soon after you made the grants that people didn't have the staff hired that were going to actually be working on the grant.
Oh
So it
yeah.
didn't make much sense to have the conference that early. Let's wait till January. So they've actually gotten their first payment and they're able to start talking about how they're going to staff the grant and get the people that are actually working on the grant to come and be there at the conference. So that's when we shifted. After the third year, we shifted over to January.
What about the grants program itself as opposed to the conference? How has that evolved over the years? How are the nature of the proposals evolved? The natures of the grants you're making. How has that changed?
We had to do a mind shift. My goal with the program was always to do projects that were replicable and could be used. You know, they weren't so bespoke that they would only work for one individual legal aid program. And that caused some tensions at the beginning. I remember, I won't name names, but I remember an executive director who got in touch with our vice president complaining because I was trying to make them change the scope of what they proposed in their grant. And a lot of what I wanted in it wasn't applicable to them. And so I explained to the vice president, yeah, I did that, but it's because I want it to be broader than just the needs of this one program. I want it to be something that can be used by multiple programs. And then years later, that director came back to me and said, hey, I understand now what you were doing. And I think that's one thing that's changed. At the beginning, people really focused on their individual program. But now I see lots of cooperation of the programs where they'll come in and they've already talked to people in 2 or 3 other states that are going to be on their advisory committee. And so it's a much broader type of initiative than it was initially when we started.
Are there any of the projects that you have funded, not you personally, but the TIG has funded over the years that you think that were particularly impactful or particularly trailblazing in their impact?
Well, online intake is one for sure. We started out doing online intake as a pilot project, and now most of the programs have online intake. I think that's been very impactful from
I'm
that
surprised you would
standpoint.
say they don't all have it at this point. There are still some that don't
No,
have it?
there are still some places that don't have, and it varies on when they say online intake, just how robust it is.
Yeah, okay.
I'm talking about a system like you see in Michigan or Illinois and all, where they really get into triaging
Mhm.
and they help people get to the right resource. And it's not just a form that comes up on the website that they can fill out and then it goes into by email or
Yeah.
something like that. That's what some of the people called online intake to begin with.
Right.
And so I think that's been very impactful. Another thing that we can't forget too is LSNTAP. We haven't talked about that. The Legal Services National Technology Assistance Project. That's something we started way back in 2001 because we realized that the programs needed not just money to do technology, they needed actual guidance and training. And so we set up the LSNTAP back in the time to do web resources and to do webinars that the community could participate in to learn about technology. And another thing that we did that was very helpful, I told you we were setting up the statewide websites. We also funded what we called website circuit riders. These were people that worked with the programs. If you were having a little trouble setting up your program or you wanted to meet with stakeholders and all, they'd actually fly in and spend a couple of days working with the states on how to set up their content management plans, how to get stakeholder engagement, those types of things. That's one thing TIG wanted to do, not just give you money, but also give you guidance and assistance.
Yeah. One of the events of this year's conference was this sort of pre-conference event that was jointly organized by the LSC and Kristen Sunday from Paladin that focused on AI's potential or impact on addressing pro bono and access to justice. What are your thoughts about what have you been seeing so far, or what do you think is going to be coming down the road in terms of the impact of AI on access to justice broadly and on legal services providers specifically?
One of the reasons it was hard for me to go ahead and retire was there's two new projects this year that are funded. One to Chicago Legal Aid, actually Legal Aid Chicago, I should say, to implement Copilot, Microsoft Copilot for their staff. So I think we're going to see how AI is really going to help the staff with the routine things that they have to do, speed up their work, help their writing ability, make sure they use plain language and such. And so they're going to do a cross section of the staff. Hopefully, they'll do a really good job of showing what the baseline time is and then how much time they can save. So I think it's going to have an impact on our staff's ability to help more people. But then there's another grant to West Virginia where they'll be working again with Margaret and Stanford to train a large language model using the content from the statewide websites so that we can be sure that the information has been vetted and also to make it easier to make it the geolocation, because that's one of the biggest challenges that we have as legal service providers. Unlike the medical profession where the flu is the flu in California or New York, a divorce is completely different. And so it's difficult when people go to Google and do a search because they may find a form from Montana that they're trying to use in Missouri. And that doesn't work so well. I think AI is going to help us really be able to tailor the information that people get to their circumstances in their geolocation, because I think that's going to be very important. And I'm just really excited to see how this pans out. Margaret's been doing a lot of research on this. We worked with a group of students with 2 different semesters. They went out to some of the self-help centers and actually watched people using AI. I think at the time they were using Copilot and whatever Gemini was called by Google at that time. And they realized that people didn't understand how to do AI prompts.
Yeah.
And so I think one of the challenges for legal aid is going to be what Margaret calls algorithmic education. We need to put together a course that people on the websites can, maybe 5-10 minutes just to teach them a little bit about the differences between a search with Bing or Google as opposed to doing an AI prompt for Copilot or GPT or Gemini, something like that. But I think this is great potential. I worked on the Legal Navigator project at Alaska and Hawaii, and we worked with Microsoft on this. And the idea was somebody could come in plain language, describe what their legal problem was, and then get an action plan that would give them information, show them any videos, take them to the forums that they need, something like that. But the AI technology at the time, we started this project in 2017, wasn't there to use it. And so everything was having to be done with the branching logic. And that's very time consuming. I think AI now is going to be able to do that same type of result without having to use the branching logic, which should make it more scalable.
So when new kinds of exciting technology keep coming along, it gets hard to retire from a career in technology, right?
It does. It does.
I know the feeling. I feel the same way. I'm like,
well,
I'm more excited now than I was when I started down this road a long time ago.
well, like Notebook LM, the other day, I joined the board of the Oklahoma Access to Justice Foundation, and something to do to improve access to justice here in Oklahoma, where I live. And they sent their annual report. So I uploaded the Notebook LM and told it to create a podcast for me. And I mean, in like 5 minutes, I've got this podcast of this man and this woman talking about this report. It sounds a little cheesy, but I mean, just think this is the first iteration.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's going to put you out of business, Bob, but
Oh, it might.
I really think tools like that, if we can take our legal information that sometimes is so much in our legalese and jargon and put it into formats like that, you can even interrupt this and ask it questions about the content.
Yep.
Just imagine if we can put something about divorce or guardianship or protective orders up there, and people can interact with it, ask the questions, and it's all geo-specific. That's going to be much better than just a PDF on the website.
Right. What do you think the impact or the influence of the TIG program, the grants program, the conference has been kind of on the legal technology landscape beyond legal services organizations?
Well, I understand. I mean, because at the time we put out our technology summit report, that was something that the private bar latched onto and thought that this would be good for their practices. And I think the courts have done the same thing. If you read our statement of purpose in that, which was to get some form of legal assistance to everybody that had an unmet legal need and couldn't afford the lawyer. I don't know the exact wording off the top of my head.
Yep.
A couple of years later, the Conference of Chief Justices and COSCA adopted almost word for word that same principle. So I know it's had an influence on more than just legal aid because we see it reflected in what the courts are trying to do. And we've had really good relationships with TIG and the courts. We've done some projects where we work together, like in Montana. We funded the equipment for remote self-help centers, but the court actually staffs those. And that's been going on now for over a decade. We've done similar types of things where we had court sections of the website in New York and in Texas. We worked with the automated forms, integrating it, into the e-filing systems in Illinois. And so I know it's had a lot more impact than just on legal aid. And I think it's that, along with the state planning efforts that I talked to you about that we were doing in the early 2000s, really got people focused on coordinating the service delivery, which I think led a lot to all of the access to justice commissions around the country. Because when I started, there weren't a lot of access to justice commissions, but they follow the pattern of what we've been saying should be done with state planning, which is a coordinated delivery system involving legal aid, private bar, and the courts. And I think that TIG has supported that. I'm not saying we drove those efforts, but I think we did support those. And the conference gave people a forum to actually talk about this immigration, where they didn't have a forum like that before.
You've personally done so much to enhance access to justice, to enhance the use of technology and advancing access to justice. As you kind of look back on your career, is there anything that you are particularly proud of?
Boy, that's a hard question.
It is a hard question.
I think the thing probably I'm the most proud of would be the conference itself. The way that conference has grown and become recognized worldwide and gives people a chance to come together. Because one of the problems that we had with legal aid was you'd have somebody in the state who was working on technology and they'd be all by themselves. They feel alone because nobody else in the program worked on technology and all that. So by starting the conference and then the listserv, LSNTAP has a very active listserv of people asking questions back and forth in the community. I think that let people know, oh, I'm not alone. There are other people working on these issues. And we've seen the community just grow and grow and grow. So I think that's probably what I'm most proud of, is building that community of people who work together on all of these efforts and actually know that they're not alone in their struggles.
And that's still happening. I spoke to somebody at this most recent conference who, I think I happened to sit next to her at lunch or something, and she said it was her first time there, but they had a directive from their new executive director or somebody in the organization that they needed to get more savvy about technology, and she was there to learn and trying to figure it all out. Those people are still finding support out of that conference.
Well, and if they go to the LS Tech listserv and you can ask the question, you've got all these people helping you out where,
Yeah.
you don't know where to turn or what to do. And it's been a great community and they're very supportive of one another. And, we get good responses on the webinars that we do with all the different subjects and all. And, lots of people come back there and look. And so, I mean, I think that's been a really positive for the community.
Yeah. Anything else that you wanted to mention about the conference, about the grants, the conference? Anything else that I haven't had a chance to ask you about?
Well, I haven't really talked about the rest of the staff, David Dunbrake, Jane Ribatanera, they were just great colleagues. Eric Matheson. We were all together for over a decade working on this. And so that's kind of unusual at LSC for one staff to stay together. Now, David's moved up and working more on disasters. But, Angela Tripp's come in and, MJ's come on board. And so I think it's going to stay strong and continue growing. And I hope I can keep my hand in some way. But, I want to be sure that everybody knows I didn't do this by myself, that there was a lot of other good people working on this over the years.
I'm glad you made that point. And will it now be Jane who's primarily responsible for it, or?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, we've kind of faced over the last couple of years, Jane took on more responsibility for the conference because I knew I couldn't keep doing it forever. And so,
Yeah.
and,
Yeah.
Jane's very good at this. Well, you can see how well it ran. I went through the session proposal, but I didn't have any of the logistical stuff to be. It was kind of interesting being at the conference where I could actually go to the sessions.
And relax a little bit. And that's great.
Exactly. Well, and
Glenn,
the roast and toast that they had for me was a lot of fun. So you don't get to see John Grecian singing it and playing guitar very often.
That was fun. I crashed that. I'm not even sure I was supposed to be there, but I somehow made my way into that, and that was a lot of fun. Well, Glenn, thank you so much for taking the time to chat and share some of your memories about these programs.
Bob, I really appreciate the opportunity. As you can tell, I can talk about tech as long as you'll let me talk. So thank you very much. And thanks for coming to the conference and promoting it, all that you do. You and Roger Smith and all have really helped us out too by getting us more attention than just with the legal aid community, with all the work that you guys have done about showing and focusing what we do at the conference.
Yeah, I really get a lot out of going to it, and it's one of my favorite conferences to attend. So I'm glad I can be there.
And you never run out of food. I'll tell you one more anecdote.
The food is good.
One more anecdote if you got time.
Yeah.
The very first conference he had in New Orleans, we had the 32 people, and I was the first conference I'd ever planned. We were going to have a break. And you know what? Hotels charge outlandish amounts of money. They wanted $32 a dozen for the cookie. No, $36 a dozen. It was $3 a cookie. I thought, well, we can't afford that. We're legal aid. We had to go. Well, you would have thought that I'd starved these people because at break we didn't have cookies. So I came back to Randy Ewells, our vice president, and I told her this story. And she said, well, Glenn, don't you remember what Attila said? And I said, no, Randy, well, I don't know what Attila said that has anything to do with it. He said, feed the Huns. So that's one thing that we've always tried to do at the TIG conference is make sure there's lots of food. And, I think that helps our evaluations immensely.
It was good food. I can attest to that. All right. Well, again, thanks so much, and congratulations on your retirement. Congratulations on all you've done, and great to chat with you. See you
Bob,
soon.
it's nice visiting with you, and I hope to keep seeing you over the years.
All right. Well, that does it for today's show. I appreciate all of you listening. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. If you'd like to share your own thoughts or comments on today's show, go ahead and message me on LinkedIn or other social media, or you can always email me at ambrogi@gmail.com. And if you're a fan of the show, please leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts. And LawNext is a production of LawNext Media. I'm your host, Bob Ambrogi. I hope you'll join us again next time for another episode of Law Next. Thanks for listening to today's show. I hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to share your own thoughts or comments, you can message me on LinkedIn or other social media, or just email me, ambrogi@gmail.com. And if you're a fan of this podcast, please leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts. Law Next is a production of Law Next Media. I'm your host, Bob Ambrogi. I hope you join us again next time for another episode of Law Next.